I was born in the wagon of a traveling show. Mama used to dance for the money they'd throw. Grandpa did whatever he could. Preach a little gospel, sell a little bottle of homemade goods. Hello, everyone. It's very cold today. It actually feels like winter. Welcome to November, or I should say, welcome back to November. Today, we are going to be talking about my very favorite X-Files Monster of the Week episode, and that is Season 2's Humbug. Ooh, I love this episode so much. Have very fond memories of watching it as a kid and fond memories of watching it as an adult with my daughter. This is a very popular episode in the Scarborough household. So let's dive right into it. This is an episode written by Darren Morgan. I believe it's the second episode he wrote after Blood, which was at the beginning of season 2. Darren Morgan would go on to write some of the most famous X-Files episodes, Jose Chung's From Outer Space, War of the Copperphages, and he came back in the revival to write Mulder and Scully Meet the Weremonster and the Mandela Effect. So, he's a big deal. Now, yeah, Darren Morgan's an awesome writer. I always say that, he gets Mulder and Scully better than their creator, Chris Carter. Yeah, he's a fantastic writer. So, let's dive right into it. So the episode begins in Florida. As my spouse would say, nothing good ever happens in Florida. If it's set in Florida, you can just bet on nothing good happening. And you see these kids, they're playing in a pool. It's one of those above ground get-ups. And there's this thing sneaking up on them, and it has scales, and it looks really, really unusual. And it jumps out of the trees, and they scream, and it turns out is their dad. And his name is Harold Glazebrook, a.k.a. the Alligator Man. And one thing Darren Morgan loves to do is turn tropes on their head, especially tropes used in the X-Files. Like this guy who looks very unusual in any other X-Files episode. You would just assume that he is the beastie. But in this episode, he's a loving father, and it's very heartwarming to see him with his kids. You see Darren Morgan turn tropes on their heads a lot of times in his episodes, like in War of the Copperphages. The cockroaches aren't hurting anyone. It's the humans who are hurting one another. In Jose Chung's From Outer Space, you see that as well. So, the kids are like, "Hey, Dad, did you have a fun time on your trip?" And you learn that Harold Glazebrook is traveling the country. He is an escape artist, but he cannot escape the cold hand of death. You see something dive into the pool and take a chunk out of him, and boy, oh boy, it looks like a shark attack. And this person who, like I said, in any other X-Files episode, you would just assume would be the, quote, monster, becomes the victim. And you'll see that a lot in this episode. So there's credits. You go see Mulder and Scully in their office. And Mulder shows Scully this picture of Harold Glazebrook. And she's like, "Well, what happened to him?" And Mulder says, "Nothing you can ascertain from that photo," which is a pretty ableist thing to say. Like, to just assume that's what Scully's asking about the man's appearance, or he has these scale-like growths on his face. And Mulder tells her he had this condition where he would appear this way. And he says to Scully, he's like, "What are your initial thoughts on this case?" And she says, "Imagine going your entire life looking like that." Now, that line will come back at the end, so put a little pin in it. And one podcast, I think it was the Sex Files podcast, pointed out that line that Scully says seems like it would be very mean-spirited or catty. But I believe Gillian's acting like really brings out Scully's compassion and empathy for this man. She's probably seen her fair share as a medical doctor. And you see the compassion on her face. Gillian really brings that out. And oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So they go to Florida. And they meet up with the sheriff. Oh, cheers. Fireball whiskey with Coke, as usual. They meet up with the sheriff. They're in this really cool diner with like a circus tent as the top, and he's telling them about this town that they're in, about how it was begun by Barnum Bailey Circus. The people would come there in the off season to kind of vibe, you know, and that's how the town began. And Scully is talking about these serial killings, and she's like, well, this could explain it, you know. This person would feel alienated from society, being a person in a, quote, sideshow, and they could, that could fuel their anger in doing these serial killings. And the sheriff's like, hey, you know, let me stop you right there. You know, he's like, these people, you know, he calls them, they're called very special people. I really love that. He's like, you know, I've come to find that people view them more as, and he uses the F word. I'm not going to say what it is because I think that's an offensive word, but he says people view them as unusual more than they do. And that's super interesting. We're going to talk in depth about that. And then Scully makes a really good point, and she says, well, you know, serial killers seem like normal, everyday people to their families and their neighbors until it comes out that they're murdering people systematically. And so then they go and see Hepcat Helms, and he is an artist. Love this actor. He's in another episode, and I cannot think what it is. As usual, my cat Cookie's trying to drink my whiskey. You can't drink whiskey, baby. When they go in, there's a song playing by J.P. Richardson, aka the Big Bopper. I almost think Darren Morgan had like this thing for J.P. Richardson because his songs are featured in a lot of his episodes, like Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. They reference the song Chantilly Lace by the Big Bopper. So they talked to Hepcat, and he drew this illustration on the diner menu at the diner they were in. And it's this very odd looking thing, looks like this mummified monkey with a fishtail. And he calls it the Fiji Mermaid. And he starts telling this story about the Fiji Mermaid, about how P.T. Barnum, like, hawked it as a mermaid, and people, like, said, no, that's a monkey with a fishtail sewn on. So he had to, like, say, like, this is a hoax, you know, because people, like, ratted him out. But then, as Hepcat says, that just made people want to see it more. And he's like, you know, it's a humbug. Haha, call back to the title. But, you know, is P.T. Barnum a genius because he, has an actual Fiji mermaid? Or is he a genius because he got all this money from, like, hawking this monkey with a fishtail? My husband is doing some welding, and it's very loud, so just bear with us. That's really interesting and very meta. So Darren Morgan's episodes are funny, and they're dark, and they're emotional, but they're also very philosophical.
Is that too loud?
No, it's cool. It's cool. We're doing fine. So, I talked about this in the episode Hollywood AD. how David Duchovny, who wrote that episode, is, I think, trying to be like Darren Morgan, and it does not work out. So Darren Morgan is also famous for like making his episodes meta, like kind of breaking down the fourth wall. You see that a lot in The Mandela Effect, in Mulder and Scully Meet the Weremonster, and pretty much all of his episodes, especially in Jose Chung's From Outer Space. But when Hepcat says that, I'm thinking about the X-Files. I was chatting on Twitter this past week. R.I.P. Twitter. It might not be up when you watch this video. I'll talk about that at the end of the episode. So one thing someone brought up is Mulder is right like all the time. And I've always believed, he's not. Because, and as I pointed out, 98.9% of the time in the X-Files, you don't see the monster or the ghosty or the beastie or the supernatural thing. So it's up in the air. Like, it could be supernatural shenanigans, but then it might as well not be, because it's never shown to us. We never get that substantial evidence of the supernatural. So it's always up in the air. And it just keeps the audience coming back. Like, it's more scary to see the edges of something than to look at it directly. And I think that's what Darren Morgan is referencing in that line. It's very interesting. So then Mulder and Scully go to the motor court to stay. And they meet Mr. Nutt. And Mr. Nutt, the actor who plays him, is the same guy who played in Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, which is my spouse's favorite movie. You love that movie, don't you? He's not talking. He's so shy. He's so handsome, though. So he's in this room, and he says, "Eat the corn." When I first saw Mr. Nutt, when I watched the X-Files, this episode when I was 12 years old, I thought about that scene from Twin Peaks, and it scared me. Nothing against the actor who played Mr. Nutt; he's a fantastic actor, but it traumatized me, that scene from Twin Peaks. So can't see Mr. Nutt without saying "eat the corn." Twin Peaks. Good God, what a weird ass show that was. So what a classic though. So they go and see Mr. Nutt, and he is a little person. He has dwarfism, and Mulder says, how long have you been in the circus? And Mr. Nutt understandably goes off on him. We've seen Mulder be pretty damn ableist in the past. And this won't be the last time he's ableist. In Home, you see that in the episode Roland, you see that. He's a pretty ableist bastard. And Mr. Nutt goes off on him, understandably. He's like saying, who the hell do you think you are, man? Just because I have short stature, you're going to say I belong in a circus. And he just goes off on him. He goes on this big tirade about how he has a degree in hotel management. And then my cats are fighting. They are on a just... Oh, Elsa, our alpha cat, is just being the most pissy little thing today. She tackled her sister. Cats, man, what do you do? So, then Mr. Nutt tells Mulder hey, you shouldn't make assumptions. I would have assumed from your imaginative necktie designs. I think about the scene in Brother Bear where the two moose are talking trash about each other, and I think it's Rut tells Took, he's like, big nose, and he's like, you took it too far, man. And I think Mulder feels that way when Mr. Nut says imaginative necktie designs. He's like, oh, you got me where it hurts, man. We all know about Mulder's wonderful taste in ties. It's pretty bad. So, and then Mr. Nut says, I would have just assumed that you were an FBI agent. And Mulder's like, and I am an FBI agent. You get this very cute shot of Scully. Mr. Nut has this dog, like a Jack Russell Terrier. And the dog looks a lot like Daggoo. In the episode, Mulder and Scully meet the were-monster. Was Daggoo Commodore's pup? Or grandpup? Or great-grandpup? We don't know. As Scully would say, must be an X-File. Anyway, you hear Commodore, the dog, whining in the background. And Scully's like, got her finger like this. And it is the cutest scene. I love that. I want that to be someone on Tumblr. Make it into a GIF. That's what I want for Christmas. So, Scully and Mulder go to their court. And they meet Lanny. The actor who plays Lanny, the man who's carrying their bags, I think he was in like every 90s sci-fi show. He was on The X-Files. He was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He was on Charmed. He's just in a lot of those kinds of shows. Anyway, love Lanny. Fantastic character. He speaks, everything he says is like Shakespearean. And he's really good. Anyway, he has this mass on his abdomen. And as it turns out, Lanny and his twin brother, when they were born, they were conjoined in a way where his little brother, Leonard, never got older. He just kept... Lanny grew up, and his little brother, Leonard, stayed attached to his abdomen and kind of, Scully says later on in the episode, fed off of him in an almost umbilical way, as a fetus would feed off of its mother. That's really fascinating, to say the very least. Anyway, he carries their bags to the door, and he's telling them, like, hey, working in the circus was the best life I ever had. And he says all I had to do was stand there and tell jokes about my little brother Leonard. And then Mr. Nutt, who was the hotel manager, convinced him that, he said, how does he say it? He's like, showing off your physical deformities is like demeaning. But then he's like, and now I carry people's luggage for a living. That's a pretty good joke. So Lanny tells him, don't let the Fiji Mermaids bite. There's this hilarious scene where he's walking away, and he's like, I didn't mean to imply we had bed bugs. And he's like, what I meant to say is... And Mulder says, don't let the Fiji mermaid bite. And Lanny's like, yes, that's right. That's right. And then he just like hits a toot from his flask. Love Lanny. Best character in this episode, possibly the best character in the X-Files. So, then you see Hepcat. He's in his studio. And this thing that attacked Harold Glazebrook in his pool attacks him. And you just hear this high-pitched screeching, and it's scary as hell. That sound effect is just... It still holds up. We'll talk about the Fiji Mermaid and how it still scares me to death. So, they go and see... the next morning, Scully wakes up, and she sees a man, like, falling in front of her window. And it turns out it's an acrobat, and she wakes up and she looks at the acrobats, and you get this really cute moment of Scully just watching the these acrobats. One thing I want to point out in this episode is how Mulder and Scully react to this community of people. that are very foreign to them. First of all, this episode is a metaphor for a safe space. If you don't know what that is, it's a place where people who are marginalized or alienated can go to feel safe among people who are very much like them. And they're important. They're very important. This is what's happening here. So we have these people with they look different physically, and they're coming together and living together and just thriving. They're having beautiful lives. They're getting married. They're having kids. They're having jobs, and they're celebrating who they are. It reminds me a lot of X-Men. How the kids would come to the Xavier school and like just, you know, revel in their mutant powers and be happy. That is important. It's an important kind of representation to see that, especially in the time where this episode was made. I remember growing up gay in the South, you know, and I just grew up alone and ashamed. I oftentimes didn't have words to describe what I was going through. I was being told I was going to hell. I lived in constant fear of being outed as being gay. And like, me and my mom were talking about, like, now kids in Gen Z and this newest generation, alpha generation, kids immediately have an online community because almost from birth they're introduced to this online community, and especially LGBTQ plus kids, like, and trans kids, like, they immediately have this community of people like them who are encouraging them, and that's super important. And it's something I never grew up with. Sometimes I wonder, like, how different would my life have been if I'd have had that, you know, a community of other queer kids to talk to and to hang out with and to understand, like, I wasn't alone. And I think this is very much a metaphor for that kind of thing. It's like people who are marginalized, or people who are queer, or people with disabilities, or anyone that society kind of forces to its fringe or alienates, can get together in these spaces and feel safe and good and thrive and hang out and have friends and lives. And it's interesting seeing how Mulder and Scully react to that in their different ways. Cookie, get your tail out of my face, you. So with Scully, you know, you get this scene of her, like,
I'll be back,
watching the acrobats. And, you know, she has a look of delighted wonder on her face. And you see Scully have this reaction when she's placed in, like, in places that are very foreign to her. She reacts with curiosity, wonder, and almost friendliness. We see it in Shapes, where she comforts Gwen and kind of forms that bond with her. We see it in the season 7 episode with the genie, where she encounters the man who's been turned invisible. She reacts to these things with wonder. There's a dozen other examples. For people to say that she is closed-minded is very unfair, because Scully is a scientist, you know. Why wouldn't she want to make these discoveries, you know, and learn about things that are new to her? Because as a scientist, that's in her nature. And I don't understand why people say that she's close-minded, because she isn't. Like, in these kinds of circumstances, she is delighted. She wants to discover and learn about these new things and these new people and create rapport with them. But I'll let you guess who the close-minded person is. It's Mulder. And we've seen this before. People have pointed it out to him, just how close-minded he is. Now, I think in this episode, he's not acting as shitty as he is in an episode like Shapes, where he just walks in there, starts trying to throw his weight around. Now, he does that here, like with Mr. Nutt, and he immediately puts him in his place, and he's like, hey, this isn't your turf, man. You need to step off. But seeing how Mulder reacts to the people in this community, he reacts with suspicion at the worst and indifference at best. And that, like, on the surface, that's surprising, because isn't Mulder supposed to be the most empathetic one and the one with the sense of wonder? Like, I don't understand why he isn't the one, like, getting out there and being like, whoa, okay, this is super cool. This guy has this thing where he can feed his twin in an almost, like, umbilical-like way. Like, Mulder should be, like, over the damn moon about that. I'm trying not to cuss so much in these videos because my daughter wants to watch them. But it's Scully who's the one saying, like, wow, this is amazing. This is an amazing discovery. And she's reacting with delight, to be here. So, Lanny comes up. He has his little twin sticking out of his bathrobe. Scully stares at it, and he stares at her boobs, which are sticking out of her bathrobe. And then they kind of do this cute little thing where they, like, tuck their appendages into their clothes, and it's pretty adorable. So he says, hey, there's been another murder, and they go and see the crime scene with Hepcat, and they notice there is blood on the window, but it's on the outside of the window. And the sheriff says, hey, you'd have to be a contortionist or crazy or both to get through there. I love the sheriff. We're going to talk about him in a minute. And they go and see Dr. Blockhead, who is played by Jim Rose of Jim Rose's Circus. Jim Rose is still out there doing stuff. He's on Twitter. He has some pretty cute Twitter posts. You should check it out. But they go and see him. And at the beginning of the episode, he was the one who crashed the funeral of Harold Glazebrook and shoved a railroad spike into his left ventricle. No, stay here. Stay here. You're warm. You little warm baby. That's right. My cat's in my lap. And she's sitting here because she knows Elsa's not here to run her off. So they go and see Dr. Blockhead. He's getting out of a straitjacket over a pot of boiling water. You get this really cute scene where he hammers a nail into his nose. Just some wonderful one-liners. Mulder asks him, he says, do you ever encourage people to do this? And he's like, are you crazy? And he just has the nail sticking out of his nose. Love Dr. Blockhead. He's a good boy. He also asks Scully, he's like, how many people do you know who can get out of a straitjacket in under 30 seconds? And she's like, thankfully none. Anyway, Mulder pulls the nail out of his nose. You get this pretty great expression from Mulder, who we all know is terrible with, like, icky bodily or medical stuff. We know Mulder is. And even Scully looks pretty squicked out, so you know it's pretty bad. And then this man pops out of the pot of hot water, and he's the conundrum. He's this man with, like, puzzle pieces tattooed on his head. Mulder saw him earlier that morning at the river just catching and eating a fish. And I love that scene. It's in direct contrast to how Scully reacts to the acrobats. Like, she's just delighted at this. It amazes her. She has this childlike wonder. Mulder reacts to the conundrum coming out of the river with a fish you see his face. He's just disgusted. And again, it shows the difference between Mulder and Scully. Like, Mulder is touted as the open-minded one when he is very much the skeptic. And Scully is actually the believer when she is touted as the skeptic, which is pretty much the hallmark of the show. So then Dr. Blackhead like feeds the conundrum this pot of crickets, which he eats, and then he says, "But where are my manners?" And he's like trying to, squick out Scully, and instead she just says, "Thank you," and she takes the cricket and she eats it. And in the behind the scenes of this episode, Jillian actually eats that damn cricket. But it turns out this she doesn't. Scully kind of walks away. Mulder is very impressed by her eating that cricket, and pretty turned on as well. He's like, this has got my motor running. So turns out she didn't eat it. She pulls it out from behind his ear. And then Mulder pulls out the nail that was in Dr. Blackhead's nose. And I love the canonical fact that Mulder and Scully can do magic. That's just so cute. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, this is just part of their personalities. This is what they do. I'd love to imagine them if in the universe where they got to raise their children, just like impressing their kids with their magic. And they were like, "Oh, mom and dad's so cool. They can do this trick." Like, that would be precious. So, Scully goes to this museum and she meets this fellow, the museum curator. The actor is in a lot of other episodes. He's the hypnotist in Jose Chung's From Outer Space. He's the tarot card reader. Excuse me, baby. From Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. Very interesting looking guy. I also like how you never clearly see his face in this scene. That's pretty awesome. He has this condition, I believe it's called bell dropsy, where one side of his face is like, the skin is kind of sagging. So he's telling Scully this story about Chang and Ong, the first conjoined twins to like live to adulthood. Excuse me. And he tells her this story about how Chang passed away first, and then Ong woke up and his brother was dead, and he passed away from fright. And it's a really like sad story. Anyway, he tells Scully, he's like, "I know you're working on this investigation and I have something for you to help you." But he like swindles her out of $10 more. And he tells her to like go in a room and not tell anyone what you find, which is just a big red flag to me. And one thing I love about Scully's character is she has this superstitious side. And it's just a really nice touch to her character that was definitely put there by other writers and not Chris Carter, and also Jillian's acting. In +1, the revival episode, I think it's one of 3 good episodes in the revival. She throws salt over her shoulder. And then in Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose, like when the stupendous Yoppie's on television, you see her like picking up the phone to call Yoppie. And it's a really nice touch. You have this really taciturn medical doctor and federal agent and who's rooted in science and logic. And she has this superstitious side. I love that about Scully. Anyway, she goes in the room and she opens this chest and womp womp, it leads to the exit door. You got swindled, Scully. And it brings back the line where she tells Mulder, do you remember what Barnum said about suckers, about how a sucker's born every day? And she got suckered. So nobody's perfect, Dana Scully. Just But if any person is close to being perfect, it's a Dana Scully. So then turns out that was not all in vain, because she goes to see Mulder. He tells her Dr. Blockhead is actually not a doctor. He says he does not hold a doctorate. That's a pretty good. Mulder and Scully are very cute in this episode. As in the Goldberg variation episodes like Rain King. This is what the X-Files should have been. It should have been just two FBI agents running around investigating spooky shenanigans and falling in love. No sexual assault, no reproductive trauma, just like that's it. And you see shows that came after the X-Files that were heavily inspired by them. Gravity Falls is the example that immediately comes to mind, but also shows like Over the Garden Wall. Like that's what they are. They're just people running around having spooky adventures, and that is what brought the fans to the X-Files. It wasn't the sexual assault. It wasn't the reproductive trauma. It wasn't Mulder's problematic behavior that's never addressed. It's that. Why couldn't we have that? It makes me a little angry. Like, we could have had this, but no, Chris Carter had to double down on this problematic horseshit. So, anyway, Mulder and Scully are talking. Scully hands him this flyer that she found at this museum about Jim the dog face boy. She like goes into how he was found in Albania, how he devoured raw meat. It's this boy covered in dog hair. And then he began to lose his hair, and he settled down in this small town in Florida and became the sheriff. That's right. The sheriff is actually Jim the dog face boy. They go and see Jim, aka the sheriff. Sheriff Jim. And he cuts a potato and buries it under the full moon. And Mulder and Scully are like digging it up. There are wonderful one-liners in this episode where the sheriff's like, "What do you think you're doing?" And Mulder's like, "We're exhuming." And then he looks at it, he's like, "Your potato." The sheriff's like, "Yeah, your investigation's not going very well." So then we cut back to the trailer court. The conundrum is giving Mr. Nutt his rent check. And then you see a hand come out of the doggy door. And it's this thing that's killing people. You hear that horrible, high-pitched squealing noise, which lives rent-free in my nightmares. And poor Mr. Nutt. You see his dog, Commodore, like standing to the side, barking half-heartedly. Dogs on the X-Files don't give a shit, do they? Dwayne Barry's dog ran outside and was barking at the aliens. The dog in Tesos Desbertos, like, say, they're like, our masters can get fucked. Like, we don't care. They're like, screw them. Like, we don't care about them. Almost makes me wonder if the writers had a personal thing against dogs. So, we know Mulder doesn't like dogs. So, then they go to the trailer court where poor Mr. Nutt has been murdered. And poor Lanny, he's going through it, man. He's saying like Mr. Nutt was like a brother to him. He's just falling apart. The sheriff's got to throw him in the drunk tank. So they look at his Mr. Nutt's wounds, and they're identical to the ones on Hepcat and Harold Glazebrook. And they are this wound, and it's like this circular wound. And then Scully, who's intuitive and solves every case on sheer intuition alone, and I'll say it until the day I die, she does. She goes and looks at Lanny, and she sees the same wound, but she says he's not bleeding. And that's when Scully knows little Leonard is detaching himself from his brother. and running around town trying to find a new one to attach to. Again, you see Scully like saying this is an amazing discovery, like I've never seen anything like it, and you see her having that sense of wonder and just amazement and being open to this. This brings up an interesting point. So when Scully goes into these situations, she isn't immediately dismissive of them. Like, she's open to them. And I believe it's because they are rooted in nature. What was it? She said it twice on the show. She said, nothing is in contradiction to nature, only what we know of it. And that's like her motto as a scientist. Like, Scully, I think, is not averse to the strange or the paranormal because she knows there is a solution in nature to it. What Scully is adverse to is bullshit. Like, that's what Scully can't stand is bullshit. But like things that can be solved through studying nature, like this, like Lanny and his little brother. Yeah, I mean, she's absolutely open to learning about it and discovering it and figuring it out, which is why I don't understand why people say she's closed-minded. So then she tells the sheriff, she's like, hey, you said it yourself. It's what's inside that counts. And you see this horrifying scene. She peeks out the jail bars and you just see Leonard crawling across the ground and opening this gate, and it's terrifying. Again, this was before a lot of CGI effects. Leonard was made through complete like puppetry and practical effects, and it still holds up. That little motherfucking thing is so damn scary. Like, you see his face and you're like, oh my god, and he makes that, it's like a high-pitched hissing scream. It's terrifying. They chase little Leonard into a funhouse. You get this wonderful montage of Mulder and Scully just exploring the funhouse. Scully sees all these mirrors, which is Mulder's dream. Several Scullys. We always make that joke when we see it. Mulder comes down a slide and almost lands on her. There's a cute scene where this puppet like comes flying out of the shadows at Scully, and she's about to shoot it, and she's like, huh, a fun house. Like, Jillian throws in all these cute little quirks in this episode. So then they chase Leonard out of the fun house. He runs into the conundrum, the puzzle piece man. He starts screaming, and then they run into the conundrum, and he's lying on the ground, just kind of like just vibing on the ground. Mulder does this really cute thing where he's like, this man is, and then he moves his hands like this, and he's like, and then he just runs away. I think that's some classic Sterling Duchovny acting that we have there. Meaning it's not good at all, but it's unintentionally hilarious. Anyway, then you see the conundrum rubbing his belly, and it's implied that he ate poor little Leonard. And again, like Lanny explains, Leonard didn't mean to hurt anyone. He was just looking for a new brother. As Lanny would say, they ask him, well, when will he come back to you? Because he always does. Scully says, how long can he survive outside of your body? And Lanny says, as long enough as it takes him to understand that you cannot change the way you were born. I don't really know what to make of that. Leave your explanation in the comments. I really want to know. I don't know what to make of that line. So then we get the closing scene, and Dr. Blockhead and the Conundrum are like packing all their stuff on their yellow VW bug. My dad had a VW bug, which is pretty awesome. A yellow VW bug, one of the old kinds. And Scully's explaining this to Dr. Blockhead, the case of Lanny and Leonard being conjoined, and how Leonard would feed off of his brother and then detach from him. And then Dr. Blockhead is like, well, he's like, Scully's like, I've never seen anything like it. And he's like, and you never will again, because he's like, these mutants are becoming more and more scarce. And then he says, imagine going your whole life looking like that. And he points at Mulder. Mulder is fucking posing on the steps of this trailer, and he's like looking up like this, and then he like looks back at them. It makes me think of like a deer, like when you see it in the tree stand, he's like, like, what? What's the dogs, when they see a squirrel, they're just talking, they're like, squirrel. That's what it reminds me of. So then Dr. Blockhead tells her, but nature abhors normality. And he's like, sooner or later, you're gonna get a mutant. And Scully's like, why is that? And he's like, I don't know. And then he says, some mysteries are best unsolved. And it's a great way to end a Darren Morgan episode, because I think Darren Morgan, more than any other writer in the X-Files, has that as his theme. Like, the mystery is never going to really be solved, because as I explained before in the X-Files, like, it's always up in the air if this supernatural shit exists, or is it something that, as Scully believes, can be explained through the study of nature. So that's a great way to end this episode. Humbug's great, one of my favorite episodes, my favorite Monster of the Week episode. Get out there, enjoy this beautiful weather. It is cold as balls out here, but it's beautiful. And I will see you next time. Mwah!